Court is now in session.
All rise. This is Order in the Court, an inside look into college basketball on the West Coast with veteran announcer Ted Robinson and the Pac-12's all-time leading scorer Don MacLean. So please be seated. Order in the Court. Here now are Ted and Don.
All right, welcome everybody to this week's Order in the Court. It's nice to be able to sit out in the sunshine again in Northern California. Don's in his comforts of Southern California, having just watched another UCLA win yesterday at Pauley Pavilion. But Don, this was the week we finally got the Beavs and the Cougs to play a game against each other. And I watched the whole thing, and I was completely flummoxed because Washington State conquered the one thing that's crushed them all year. They didn't turn the ball over, but they couldn't defend without fouling. And it wound up really killing him and helping the Beavs win the game.
Well, we've covered this on this show, that Oregon State's a tough matchup. Fall is a tough guard because of his size and how big he is in their floor balance and their offensive balance. So they're not easy to guard. So wasn't surprised that Washington State had to foul. I don't think they have the personnel to match up individually with Oregon State. But Oregon State, I think, is just better, Ted. I mean, I watched that game too, and they're just a better team. And we've celebrated David Riley all year about the job he's done, and they've persevered through injuries, and they're still competing, and they're still playing. But Oregon State's just a better team this year and having a better year.
I have to tell you, and I want to get into your point about David Riley in a couple of minutes, but to stay on Oregon State for a moment, there was a shot late in the game that helped Oregon State cement, because Washington State, to its credit, despite all the fouls they committed, all the tilt and the free throw totals, they hung in the game right to the end. Michael Rataj hits a turnaround fadeaway, and I closed my eyes. I said it was like watching McLean 30 years ago. Money shot in the money moment. It was seriously, I was like, I saw McLean do that so many times.
Yeah, and Rataj's become that guy, not like me, but he's become the guy where, late game situations, they're going to him. And I think his confidence has grown so much through this year. Not that he couldn't have done it last year, but he was in a different role last year. But I think he's grown into this role of being the guy, which we've talked about. And part of being the guy is not only leading your team in scoring most nights, but it's when the game's on the line, you got to deliver and make shots.
Okay, to Washington State. So the Cougs rebound off of their loss at Corvallis. They've now lost 5 in a row, and they're reeling. They go home Saturday. They play Pepperdine, and Pepperdine has them. I mean, Pepperdine's leading almost the entire game. 3 players, and you had seen Pep already this year, Don, 3 players for Pep that were really good. Mo Odom, who I'd never seen play before, had been at Pacific 2 years, was outstanding for most of this game. And then Pep just lost it. They were up 7 with 90 seconds to go. And Washington State wins the game. And we interviewed Isaiah Watts after the game, and he couldn't hold back the joy. I mean, they had been so beaten down by the Cougs that they just let go with what was, for them, a huge win in a game that, I will quote Hall of Fame coach Montgomery, defense was optional.
Look, Washington State has had a good year and a tough year all in one. I think they've exceeded expectations. I think they've really exceeded expectations based on all the injuries they've had. They lose their best player. And so they lost 5 in a row. And, that just wears you down. I don't care what team you are and what conference you're in. You lose 5 in a row, it just wears your season down. Going to practice every day, it's like becomes a chore. So what does this win do? Temporarily, it puts a smile on your face and there's a lot of joy, like you said. But can it galvanize you? Can it make practices better this week leading up to the games next week? And that's what's fascinating to me when you watch the ebbs and flows of any team in any conference. It's like UCLA. They lost 4 in a row. Everybody's writing them off. They've won 7 in a row now in the Big Ten Conference. So you never know. And it'll be interesting to see what impact this win for Washington State has moving forward.
All right. I talked to some Washington State people on Friday leading into the game. And one thing they told me interesting I wanted to ask you about as a longtime player. David Riley, the coach, first-year head coach, is only 36 years old. So, again, more in vogue with today's coaches, closer in age to players. Mm-hmm. But I was told that during this losing stretch, David Riley has been talking a lot with the players about, what do you guys think? What can we as coaches do differently? How can our staff be different and be better to help us get out of this. And it was expressed to me how interesting that was, because this is the first time David Riley had ever gone through this as a coach. He'd had 3 years at Eastern Washington. They were all great years.
Right. So
he's going through this as a head coach for the first time, but instead of being the autocrat and, cracking the whip euphemism, it's relating to players and saying, hey, what do you guys think? And what can we do to make this better? I thought that was a fascinating take.
Well, first of all, Ted, my answer, if the coach came to me and said, what can we do better? I would say, get me the ball more. That would be the first thing.
Yeah, I know. Get out of the way.
That would be the first thing. But here's the thing, and I learned this, and this is more of an NBA thing, I think, but it's like when you're going good, and this is a Pat Riley thing specifically, when you're going good, practices are harder. When you're going bad, practices are less hard, more conversation, more kind of building guys back up and that kind of thing. And I think that's a smart move by David Riley. Look, they're not going to get an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament, but let's win as much as we can to get to that WCC tournament, and then, let's see where the chips fall. But I think a smart, when your team's losing and you've had injuries, there's been adversity, the last thing you want to do is crack the whip even more. Like, you're just beating your team down at that point, and they're not going to get back up. And so I like that move. It would be interesting to hear what the players said and what they did offer up when he asked that question.
Yeah, that's a good call. And I love the way you frame that. Another point of news about Washington State that, of course, is going to impact basketball. They had a new president. New university president was introduced last week. Betsy Cantwell came from Utah State, has been at other schools in the West, Arizona and Arizona State, in her past. But I wrote down a couple of things she mentioned in her introductory news conference that I thought were incredibly important right now for Washington State. I'm a true believer in the power of college athletics for institutions like Washington State. What we choose to do with the power of the brand new Pac-12 is ours to make real. And given what's been reported, it's out there, the money struggles, bluntly, that Washington State has faced with outgoing President Kirk Schultz in recent months, those comments from the president have to sit really well with a brand new football coach coming in and a first-year basketball coach.
No doubt. And look, Utah State, how about their basketball brand now?
Well,
kind of out of nowhere. Like that place has built a real basketball program. And so you always want to hear, Ted, from whatever level of administration, that they're on board with athletics. Now, everybody has to do it differently. Everybody has different resources. Everybody has different things that they have to deal with. But you just want the messaging from the start to be, we're in on athletics. We're in on football. We're in on basketball. We're in on all the sports. Because then people get to work and make it better and make all the entire athletic department better. So great news for Washington State that she's coming in with that messaging.
And specific to basketball, as we often talk about, the new league right now shapes up to be a really good basketball league.
No doubt.
So the Cougar basketball needs that, to know that support's there. Don MacLean story time, a resounding reaction from the reintroduction of this famed segment last week. So Don,
I'm to make it fair, and it's indirectly related to Washington State. I'm going to save. I got a couple good ones I'm going to save for our last few shows, but this one I kind of came across the other day, and I remembered. Not that I'd forgotten it, I just hadn't thought about it in a while. I was thumbing through the UCLA notes before my game on Friday, and I usually don't go deep into the notes. I just get what I need and move on. But I was kind of flipping through, looking at all of it, and I came across this section of recent 40-point games for UCLA. And at the top of the list, and I forgot to look how far it went back, but like Bill Walton was in there, but there was no Alcindor, so I don't know how far it went back. But anyways, At the top of the list was Jason Capono, and he had 44 at Washington State. So the reason I'm telling you that is this was my first year of doing UCLA radio with the late, great Chris Roberts. We went to practice the day before, and now I'm fresh off. I had just retired like 8 months ago from playing. And so Capono was obviously a really good player, really good shooter. And so after practice, somebody said, who's a better shooter? So obviously I knew the answer to that. And so, but the Pono was game. So I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go 5 spots behind the line. And remember, back then, the college 3-point line was now the high school line. It's not where it is now. It was even closer. So we went 5 spots, 10 shots per spot. So I would do my 10 in the corner. He would do his 10 in the slot, then top, whatever. So I make 45. He makes 46. So he beat me. But what I find fascinating in this, and I'm not patting myself on the back or, trying to portray any arrogance here, but what a coincidence that he beat me the day before and had a career high 44 the next day. How do you draw the correlation there? It couldn't have been the extra 50 shots that got him going. It had to have been the mental, not breakthrough, but a mental something of beating me and carrying that over to the next day. I always, like going home from that game, I thought about it a lot. I hadn't thought about it in years, like I said. But when I saw it again, I love that human nature, psychological stuff that you can read into. Maybe you don't get an answer on it. But to me, it's really interesting that he did that and then had 44 the next day.
That's great. Were guys watching you do this and cheering and rooting?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's getting the boost from his own teammates, right?
Yeah, and he was good about it. He wasn't talking trash or anything, and I wasn't either. But it was just, to me, it's very interesting what certain things can do to affect a performance.
What is it about Pullman that does that? When I was, I guess it was just after your time, and I did Cal basketball for a few years, and went to Pullman, and Cal had a shooting guard named Ed Gray.
Yeah.
Actually played NBA for a little while. Ed Gray played 21 minutes in Pullman, scored 49 points. Yeah. 49 points. Sharif Abdur-Rahim, who had a long NBA career, it was his one and only year at Cal. And Sharif was nothing more than a low block guy, back to the basket. Mm-hmm. And he'd run down there and he'd get himself set up in the low block. And if he turned and he saw Ed Gray with the ball, he just gave up. He said, it's not coming to me. No. And Ed was going. And Ed scored literally 21 minutes. He scored 49 points.